First of all, thank you all for being here. This is an incredible turnout for a Tuesday night. There are a lot of folks here who are starting their own companies and interested in a forward deployed motion for their company. A lot of folks who are interested in the FDE function, potentially becoming an FDE. So we will cover a bunch of relevant topics tonight and have an amazing lineup for you. Before we get started, I'm Finn. I'm one of the partners at South Park Commons. For those who don't know or aren't familiar with the community, South Park Commons is a place for builders who are exploring their next adventure, whether that is starting a company, doing independent research, working on open source software, to come and pursue technical projects of any sort. We host events like this to bring together folks who are doing interesting frontier work in technology to learn from each other. So without further ado, we have Calvin, who built the forward deployed engineering team at Ramp, one of the kind of iconic New York startups now. Jason, who is the founder of Nominal, also was early in his career kind of at Palantir, spent time working across internal platform and forward deployment there. Howard, who is a founder who actually is from kind of the South Park Commons community, started a company called Dataland and also spent time early in his career at Palantir. And Colin, who is here in town from the UK, great to kind of have him while he was here in town, who leads forward deployed engineering at OpenAI. So yeah, thank you all for joining us. Rather than kind of giving long intros for everyone, I thought a good place to start would be, I've seen many different definitions of forward deployed engineering. So maybe each of you could just share a quick sentence or two about your company, and then go a little bit deeper into what does forward deployed engineering mean in the context of your business. Who wants to start?
Is this thing on? All right. So Ramp, hopefully you all know, save time and money. Corporate cards, expense management, bill payments, the financial operations platform that replaces an Amex and Concur setup traditionally. FDE is, we kind of use the term a little bit broadly. So FDE at Ramp has a mandate to win enterprise, the upmarket segment. And the way we do that, we are allowed to get very creative. So we're not restricted in any way. We build core roadmap features. We do whatever it takes to win enterprise. That's the one-line version of FDE at Ramp.
Awesome. Thanks for having us, Finn and South Park Commons. My name is Jason. I'm the CTO at Nominal. Nominal's building a data and AI platform to get hardware engineering data into the hands of hardware engineers. So think people who are building satellites, nuclear reactors, and other next generations of hardware. Forward deployed engineering has been like core to what we do since the beginning. One of our company values is empower their mission, and kind of as Calvin references, it's a broad mandate. It's help the customer succeed. But more like crucially, I think it's, learn where the bleeding edge of product is. What do our users need to like fully unlock their workflows, and how does that like feed into our longer term product roadmap? Excited to talk about it more tonight.
Hey, I'm Howard. I'm one of the co-founders of Dataland. So Dataland builds AI for enterprise labor outsourcing. And we work in a bunch of different sectors like healthcare, energy, consumer electronics, logistics, waste management. So we work in so many different sectors, and forward deployed engineering is really core to our company because we build highly heterogeneous agents depending on the company we work with, right? And so it's literally the lifeblood of the company. It's like we don't try to sell like some sort of large core platform to our customers. Like we sell them specific labor that meets like sort of their needs for their enterprise needs. Happy to talk about it more as we go.
Hey folks, I'm Colin, work for OpenAI. We're trying to develop AGI. And I guess to do that, you require two things. So one of them is like broad adoption, and the other one is like super capable models. And those are kind of the two mandates of the FDE team at OpenAI. So one of them is to like find, problems in the market that we think are repeatable and embed with customers to build platform, and then decide to either like ship that as a separate product or build it into something like Codex. That's like the kind of repeatable side. And the other bit is we have a group that focus on like the most challenging different industries in the world. So we work with like semiconductors, life sciences, this kind of thing, try and find the hardest problems and then work with them to solve those, like whatever it takes, which might be like help working with post-training to improve the model, or it might again involve like creating some kind of application. So that's kind of how we operate. Like we're the tip of the spear for OpenAI with the enterprise, and we try and make things repeatable, and we try and push the bounds of what the models can do.
Amazing. Thank you all for joining. Maybe a good place to start would be, I read recently that the number of FDE roles has increased 10x from where it was last year. So obviously becoming a lot more popular. And it kind of strikes me as counterintuitive because on one hand, to your point, these models are getting a lot more capable. Software generally is getting a lot better. But the importance of this role is kind of only increasing. So I'm curious to just hear maybe a little bit more about kind of why you think that is. I think Howard and Colin, you're both kind of working more with a lot of kind of agentic AI native kind of workflows. I'm curious why FDE is becoming more important as these models are also getting more capable.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that the scope of what sort of is addressable in the B2B space is just much broader than it was before, right? Like before, you could sort of build a SaaS platform that addresses some one workflow, try to sell it to everyone, and there's only a certain amount of like problems of that shape in the world. The amount of capital we spend on labor is orders of magnitude more than that, right? So and I think that if you think about all the different jobs to be done in the world, I mean, it's dizzy. I mean, it's obvious. It's so heterogeneous, right? And there's not a single. There's not. And I think. So I think in order because of the rise of AI, we can actually start to tackle. We can start to tackle the full gamut of those problems, and I think. And because of that, it's like, okay, well, you need engineers who actually really understand the use case. So you need to send them in, and they almost need to, they also need to be able to do that job themselves, right? And that's really what a forward deployed engineer is. And then they must marry that with a deep understanding of the technology and of the fundamental, frontier AI platforms like OpenAI, in order to actually solve the problem. So I think. Yeah, I think that's kind of my take. And I think part of the reason why coding agents have taken off so hard is like everyone is like, every software engineer is naturally a forward deployed engineer in the coding space, right? Because like we all code every day, so we deeply understand that use case, and that's why like the coding agents are so good. But you actually need forward deployed engineers if you want to work deep in the energy space to go in there and really understand the specificity of that industry and that role, right? In order to solve for that job to be done. I think the models are good enough to do it, but it's like the unlock is actually the need for FDEs, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's like I think if I would look at one sort of shift over the last year is like. Maybe when we were building a year ago, when we were building off like the V1 of the agents SDK, like you spent a lot of your time solving a problem, just like writing a bunch of plumbing and building tons of evals. And for every problem, you would have to build 5 different agents and 5 different sets of evals. And like the amount of time that it took to actually just like get to the point where you had something that worked took so much time that actually like the difficulty of the problems you could take on was much lower because you need to show the customer something in like some kind of length of time. Whereas like what we found in our team probably over like since maybe like January, February this year is like now with these capable like coding models like that kind of they can do long horizon tasks. They can actually like you build a lot less plumbing and you spend a lot more time solving like actual use cases. And I think that means like I guess like the fundamental thing about FDE is like embedding with specialists and understanding their tasks and then making sure the model can solve those tasks. So I think like that's how our role has changed a lot is like we spend a lot less time just like writing the same infrastructure every time, and we spend more time actually like moving up the stack and solving like harder problems. And if I use like one example, like we were working in this like semiconductor company for the last like probably 14 months, and the first 10 months, all we did was like software engineering acceleration, like deploy agents into their CI pipeline, like make like an auto debug agent and everything. But now we're actually like moving and doing like making agents that can do physical designs of chips and this sort of thing, because like we're kind of building on top of like a more stable like set of primitives where like we can kind of trust that Codex is going to do the bottom 50% of tasks pretty well, and so we can focus on like the higher level tasks, which actually like at the end of the day like give the business value. So that's how I've seen the role change probably over the last like 6 months.
Jason Kaufman, I'm curious how that manifests for you two. Do you find yourself getting a lot more leverage or kind of encouraging a lot more use of Codex or coding agents kind of as you go and deploy with customers today, or is the set of problems a bit different?
Well, I was going to say something that just strikes me in the conversation even already is that it's not specific to AI necessarily. So like when I was, I interned at Palantir in 2012, and I think back then they were just the company that was crazy enough to invest that many resources in like a forward deployed engineering team. And maybe in 99 out of 100 multiverse paths it would have failed, but it just happened to work. And I think what's happened is it's just gotten like cheaper and cheaper to produce software in general, such that like to Howard's point, like the number of things that are addressable by the software industry, by the tech industry has just like expanded a lot and then like absolutely exploded with AI. But in general, like whether or not you're talking about agentic or deploying agents or like deploying any kind of software infrastructure, like you always have to have this kind of taste around like, well, what is the customer's job versus what is something that like our forward deployed team would do? And some of that will come down to your like business model and like where your kind of like risk boundary is. But I think where it like really sings is when there is this like shared infrastructure that you watch yourself building at multiple customers, and then that gets pulled into your core product. So it might be in a model improvement, or it might be in certain types of like how agents are orchestrated. But I would say at Nominal, like, yes, like we feel like the forward deployed engineering team can be, themselves like much more productive with agentic coding and other kind of AI tools. But I think, the way I think about forward deployed engineering is kind of goes back to those other principles.
In our case, we're deploying to finance teams, so they are not coding. Some of them, but most do not. So this is why some of you might have seen Ramp Labs. We have the Excel agent, because where are they? They're in Excel. So I think that's one of the general principles of forward deployed engineering is to meet the customer where they are. What I'd add to some of this, our motion is a little less grandiose, I would say. We are just trying to not drown in enterprise. Like there's a classic trap that a lot of software companies run into. You start with like a great PLG motion, you get some traction, and then you look at the enterprise world. There's so much revenue to be had there, and it comes along and it derails your roadmap. You start going for these deals, and you just end up building so much stuff that only works for one customer. And I think FDE at this point is probably the classical solution to that problem, where you can have your core teams continue to build your roadmap and the FDE teams deal with the enterprise customers. So I know that's a very negative conception of FDE, but that is somewhat how it came to be within Ramp. And so as a result, we're mostly just trying to, I say it's a sword and a shield. We're trying to win the enterprise deals, and we're trying to protect the core teams. And yeah, so there's not quite as much like deploying AI as some of these other folks, but that's really exciting.
What was the impetus then for Ramp? Because I think of it as a very kind of product-led company, but then at some point, Eric probably came to you and said, Calvin, we need you to go and kind of, solve this problem. What was kind of that tipping point, and how did that conversation go?
Yeah, when I talk about that trap, we were like walking towards it, and but luckily we had some foresight. We realized, okay, these large projects that the enterprise customers are asking for, this is not what we were planning on building if we didn't have enterprise customers, and therefore, like, this is a bit of a problem for us, and we need to solve it. And so the fundamental idea is, instead of playing this game of telephone where the customer talks to the account manager talks to the product manager talks to the engineer says, well, that's not good, and then back and forth they go. That's what we were doing before we had FDE, and it was causing roadmap delays because everything I just said before. And so the idea behind FDE at Ramp, at least, was let's have the engineer talk directly to the customer. Unlike at Palantir, we don't actually visit them all that often. So like once a quarter or so, we'll mostly do it over Zoom. But yeah, we will talk directly to the customer. The engineer will know what the customer needs and the Ramp code base, and be able to think of solutions that the account manager and product manager would not be able to think of themselves. And so having one person, one very smart person, a great engineer with all of the context necessary, can produce brilliant solutions that a game of telephone will inevitably miss. And that's how you solve the paradox of like, how do we win the customer but not derail the roadmap? So that's kind of the FD thesis at Ramp. So
you all kind of touched on something pretty similar, which is there's there's like a fine line between a FDE and maybe a consultant or someone just doing kind of services. Like where do you draw that line in your business between what you need to go and build on a custom basis for each customer, one-off, versus bake into the platform more broadly? How do you decide where the cutoff point is there?
I think I have a lot of scar tissue here. I think Palantir went through a few years of what we call the dark ages, where the FDE team essentially revolted and said that the product that had originally been built was completely useless for the customer engagements we were doing at the time, and basically started to build entirely new things. So when we started Nominal, we were like really intense about like not letting that happen. And one of the things that we did was we took people who had built software platforms and had been on the receiving end of those like roadmap telephone games that Calvin was referencing, and basically put them, they were the first forward deployed engineers. And so they could, I could have really high trust conversations with them that they weren't basically going off and doing consulting, and that if something came up that was like too big, that we'd be like really intentional about it. Like sometimes, like another thing that we haven't touched on yet is that forward deployed engineering can accelerate sales cycles, and sometimes that's just a win-win. I will spend like nominal points against, instead of waiting 12 months for a large legacy company to get to a certain point in our engagement, like we can get them there faster, and it's like worth it for all parties. But you want to do that like really carefully, especially as you're growing your team.
Are there any examples of kind of a place or a customer where it really accelerated things or kind of helped move that sales cycle along? I'm just curious how that manifests.
Yeah, I remember like our, honestly, it was like our first large contract that we signed. The technical counterpart there was really pushing me. He was like, hey, once I get the data into Nominal, my engineers love using it to understand, like they were doing drone flight testing. And so his goal was get 40 people in his organization looking at data every single flight. On average, before us, it was 2. And, the first MVP was the data had to kind of go through these hoops before it was ready to be analyzed in Nominal. And he was like, these are scripts that my engineers need to be running on their laptops. It'd be great if you guys just handled this for us. And he didn't really know what that meant from a software architecture standpoint. And we had a guy on our team, Ross. He was a forward deployed engineer. And he and I concocted a plan where he was basically going to build this for them, but do it in a way that was generalizable across other customers, as opposed to just like bespoke to their specific data format. So, we built the architecture in such a way that they didn't really realize that, it had this, like it was a container that you could upload that had the data transformation logic that, Ross wrote it for this first customer to basically prove that the architecture worked and get them to their, mission success. But it became this kind of like core thing that we ended up selling across the rest of the fleet. And I always tell people like this was on our roadmap. I knew we would build this at some point. We just kind of like pulled it left because the opportunity presented itself.
Yeah, sure. I guess just on the what you productize, what's a one-off versus like a repeatable thing. I think like we probably evolved this like twice at OpenAI because I think we started with actually far less grandiose kind of goals. It was basically I think a lot of you probably seen the article. It was 5% of enterprises actually are getting ROI on their investments in AI, and we always said, well, the other 5% work with us. But our take at the start was well, we're just going to get 0 to 1 success is is the measure of success, because when we started, we didn't have a platform at OpenAI. It was just the API, and then the customer, and then you were in between. So we just built a ton of stuff, and then we started to find these pockets of product that we thought we were going to build. And probably about 6 months ago, if you'd asked me what the FDE was going to build, it was kind of because AI is making it easier to write software. It was we're going to make 50 of these little products, and maybe we'll make an ecosystem, and other people can make products. And then interestingly, then suddenly Codex got bigger, it got better, and now the question we ask of every product is can this just be a Codex extension? And that probably ate 80% of the products that we were making. And the 2 that we had left, one Pearson in the crowd is actually working on around regulatory document authoring, and then there's one on that's more of a kind of workflow automation platform. And for these, it's for the enterprise where they need a very high level of consistency, there is a product argument there, but everything else kind of folds into this more PLG type Codex thing. And that's kind of what we do in OpenAI FDE now is for everything, it's can this be Codex? If not, does it really have to be a separate product? Could the model just get smarter and be good at this task? So this is kind of it.
I guess to answer the question of like, is it like what's consulting versus like what's like software or something?
Especially as a founder too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
You're trying to find, your early customers.
And we're way earlier than these guys. So I think, I tend to think of this as just the way public markets evaluate like companies, right? It's like, and like what companies have as a financial asset, what makes something a software company versus a consulting company? The question is there recurring value that you're delivering to your customer on some sort of fixed cost, right? Like at the end of the day, like that is sort of the economic model that defines the difference. So I think there's many ways in which this can be true without necessarily being like, well, I have a SaaS platform that I'm trying to sell everyone. And I think especially with things like Codex or Cloud Code, as the cost of software creation goes down, it is not as a younger company, I'm not as ideological about like, hey, we need to figure out some core thing that we're trying to sell everyone. I think the way we think about it is what can we learn from every single one of our customers that allows us to accelerate the process of building these custom agents for the next customer, right? So how can we have this flywheel of learning that that reduces that initial fixed cost? And once our agent is actively doing an at-scale enterprise workflow, it's like it has extreme recurring value over time, right? So for each of our use cases, there is this sort of fixed cost recurring value equation, which makes it into a sort of a more the thing you want, which is software economics. I think, this is something that Palantir fought through for many years as well, which is like, is FDE a bug or a feature? And I think for Palantir's and I think Palantir wasn't sure for many years, but I think even in my time there, the realization was FDE is a huge feature, right? Is not a bug, so maybe I'll leave it there.
Is there a way you guys measure kind of ROI from the FDEs that you have out there in the field? Because I would imagine at some point, if you're successful, you probably want to invest less and less time, with your FDEs spending time with your customers, because a lot of what they've built should be, helping that kind of customer scale, maybe themselves. So I'm curious, like how you measure that, and then at what point do you kind of start to hand off what you've built, for your customers or alongside your customers to them?
Yeah, it's really simple at Ramp. We have the revenue from the enterprise customers and the costs of the salaries. So do that division and you get the ROI. But to give something a bit more substantive, we are always trying to inform the roadmap and or execute on the roadmap. So just like we were saying here, just pulling things to the left, we love it when we can build a roadmap feature for the customer instead of having to build something custom, because the custom stuff tends to require more maintenance. Ramp FDs are operating in the core code base, to be clear, as well. So they have close partnerships with each of the core product pods. And we are always trying to keep our changes minimal if we can, so as not to introduce maintenance costs down the line. So we have a pretty restrained team, and we try to serve a lot of customers at once. So one FDE is taking on like 5 or 6 when we can. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's what we strive for. And so that when you have that set up, the ROI becomes extremely attractive.
And I think the FDE, the motion at OpenAI is probably like slightly different because we're sort of, I guess we're trying to bet on like problems that are going to save the customer like hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars. Like, so if I solve this problem, it will have like a kind of outsized impact. And so we generally go deeper with like a fewer amount of customers. Like I think one of our biggest engagement has like 15 FDEs at this semiconductor thing, because we're trying to like basically change the whole value chain. Interestingly, like the actual, probably the most like long-term profitable engagements are more the like product-based ones, which might have like only 2 to 4 FDEs, but we're really take it a step back. I think like the reason why a lot of consultancies do FDE like sort of badly is because they are like the services revenue is like a drug that they just like can't get off of, and they just keep selling like bigger and bigger custom things. And like probably the good thing about OpenAI is that like we are not the power center of the business. The commercial arm is not the power center of the business. Like product and research are. So they're very much pushing us to like build things that they can then that we can like the market can self-serve, or like we can do with a very small amount of effort in the future. So we're kind of like trying to look across the portfolio and be like, okay, what are the verticals that we could solve these massive problems for and maybe get like some kind of recurring revenue for, and then what are those repeatable problems that we could like ship I don't know, this workflow automation thing, is that going to like make a ton of revenue over time? So with us, it's always like the services line is like a small focus, but I'd say like the bigger focus is like what is the long-term value, what is like the ARR that we're potentially going to unlock for like all the digital native customers that are then going to adopt this thing, and because that's really where like the value comes for us. It's
kind of an interesting one takeaway from that, I guess, for Howard and Jason is that I feel like if you're doing the FDE motion, it's like you said, the revenue is kind of a drug, and so it's very tempting to like you almost have this mirage maybe of product market fit where it feels like you're starting to make up a bunch of money, you're ramping up your kind of revenue, but you're not actually really developing kind of anything scalably underneath. And I think we have a lot of founders in the room who are thinking about doing this motion, and at what point do you maybe like fall victim to kind of that feeling of the revenue growing, but don't really have deep product market fit? How have you guys thought about that?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if I think of it as quantitatively in terms of like directly just the revenue and the cost. Like I think that's obviously part of it, but you can end up in a trap. Like I guess I've seen this in the past where like the customer is addicted to the forward deployed engineers more so than you as the company are addicted to the services revenue. And then when you try to pull the forward deployed engineers away, they just fire you, and that's bad. And so like you want to be kind of intellectually rigorous about like are you viewed by the customer as a consultant? I think there's like a really magical sweet spot, which is that by forward deploying, and like I do want to push you on like the going on site piece, because it can lead to this. They value the product, you teach them about the product, and they view you as a thought partner, and they'll tell you more candidly, feedback about the product, ideas about the roadmap, and then when you go and engage with them, like you might even be sending, a product team to embed with them and kind of like be a build partner, and they're willing to do that because you kind of established this relationship with them. Honestly, I think just to be vulnerable, I think I've had to kind of learn more about traditional sales because Palantir didn't do that back in my day. And a lot of like sales teams, like this is what they do, is they kind of develop that rapport. But part of the magic of forward deployed engineering is just making sure that it's like, there's not a game of telephone. It's like the engineering team is directly developing that rapport.
Yeah, I think the way we think about ROI is also revenue divided by the number of headcount. But I think there is this.
You guys are only 2 headcount.
Yeah, well, we're going to be at 3 soon. We're adding, and we're trying to get to like 10 or something. I think the critical judgment call you have to make is like, is the value recurring, right? And like. If you build something, if you just build whatever they ask for, like there's infinite things they'll ask for, right? And then it might deliver, it might deliver like a momentary piece of value, but then that value evaporates. And sometimes actually tactically you maybe need to do that in order to sort of unlock the other use case. You have to build trust. You have to unlock sort of the bigger fish. But I do think that ultimately you have to really keep in mind like, hey, is there this long-term continuous value delivery that you're able to do based on your fixed unit of work, right? So I think that's the framework that I think about it in.
Yeah, and I say 2 people half jokingly because you have obviously gotten to extremely large scale for just 2 people. So I also think it kind of speaks to maybe kind of the leverage you guys are getting from some of the systems you've built, because I don't think that 2 people would, I don't know if we'll see the one-person billion-dollar startup soon, but I think, the trend line is definitely heading that way in terms of the amount of leverage people are kind of getting just in their own work.
Yeah, we are extremely AI pilled. I think so like we actually spend a lot of our time building our meta agents, which accelerate our own process of building new agents, right? And of maintain like no agent you build is a static thing in time. It's a dynamic actor within the enterprise context of your customer. It has to, their needs for that piece of labor will evolve over time, right? Their business is going to change, their systems are going to change, their policies are going to change. They're going to release new product lines that interact with your agent that your agent must know about, et cetera, right? So how can you put in this fixed cost and get this continuous long-term value, right? It's like you actually must figure out some sort of mechanism, right, for to actually autonomize the outer loop, right? Of like, how do you, as the business changes, like how does your agent keep up with that? How does it sort of have this sort of self-improvement loop, right? And so we spend a lot of time thinking about that outer loop as well in order to give us a leverage to be able to, we have many millions of ARR per head count. So.
Yeah, I'm curious, Colin, what that looks like for you all, because I think what Howard just kind of touched on is, there's obviously, I feel like product and research are becoming more tightly intertwined. And now, I think kind of what I'm hearing today is that, go-to-market, product, and research are all now three kind of becoming more tightly intertwined when the FDE motion is done well. So I'm curious how you guys think about interfacing, not just with product and the products you build, but also the researchers too, in terms of probably a ton of really useful customer data that you can get and feed back into improving things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's kind of like a key part of the FDE model at OpenAI with outcome first. So always like success and then scale. And you've got two ways to scale. One is product, the other is through the model. And like, can we generate evals on this task with like synthetic data that kind of mimic the task, and then can we make our model like much better at this thing? And like, I guess practically, like one that like the model was really bad at was like slide generation. And then we were working with this Japanese sales team of like these 2,000 sales guys, and they wanted like this like slide buddy that they could work with. So we basically like first we had to find how do we format the slide so that the model can produce like quick slides that actually look good. And it starts off as like, okay, you've got 6 boxes and you can only place stuff in the boxes, and you're like, all right, that looks fucking terrible. And then you're like, okay, generate HTML, and then you can have like these super nice, so you try like 50 things, and then you settle on one, and then you generate like a bunch of examples, and then we take that to the post-training team, and then in 3 months, another snapshot pops out, and then suddenly like the slides are really nice. So that's kind of like that's like sort of what the flywheel looks like, is like, I guess this like, FDEs embed with the customer, figure out like how to represent the task to the model, and then generate lots of examples of that. And then the research team can like understand how to make the model do that thing. And it's often like, it's like pretty esoteric sometimes, but that's like roughly how it works. I think one other example I'd give is like we worked with a big telco to do like voice customer service. And like, I don't know if you guys have used the real-time model, but it is like, it's like I'm getting it to like follow you fucking instructions. It's like really hard. And like, getting it to follow like customer service policy is like obviously like pretty important that it follows the instructions. So this was the point that like I think when we pitched them, we did a test of 10 to just get it to read back my phone number, and it like just would not work. And we were like, oh my God. And then like 6 months later, we shipped it, and now it's like something like 70,000 calls a day getting deflected by this like AI real-time thing, and no major jailbreaks so far. So, and that was like probably like 6 months of iteration with the post-training team to improve the model, and also building as FDEs like a bunch of useful platform on top so that they can create their own evals and like make their own self-improvement loop for like subsequent runs so that they don't need the FDEs, which again is like sort of as these folks said, like is the dream.
You guys have any thoughts there?
I was just curious, did you put all of McKinsey out of a job with Slide Buddy? That was all I could think about.
Yeah, we actually do have some McKinsey guys in the team, and they were like, shedding tears for their former teammates. But it was, the slides are actually not very good. So it'll take some time before McKinsey's out of a job. But yeah, we're trending in the right direction.
More work to be done. I know I want to leave some time for audience questions, so maybe just a couple of more from me. I want to kind of ask all of you to, I'm curious what you look for in the FDEs that you bring onto the team. You're obviously all growing your teams pretty significantly. And maybe Jason and Howard, we can start with you, because you've seen this over, probably the evolution of the FDE for over a decade now from your time at Palantir. So I'm curious what you think makes a great FDE. What do you look for as you're hiring folks? What are the skills that you want?
Yeah, I mean, I think you really need that strong. You need to be like very, very strong technically, but also sort of really keep up with all of these frontier model changes. Like Colin said, as like the number of iterations on just the real-time model. Like we're constantly keeping up to date with that, right? And we're constantly delivering that new frontier capability to our enterprise customers. So you have to be really good at traditional software engineering as well, because you're building really complex integrations, right, in these enterprise environments. So it's not just it's not just the non-deterministic model pieces, but there's this really the other half of it is sort of the account management and the customer success halves, right? And I think FDE really is. I think it's really sort of the best training ground to be a future founder, because in order for you to succeed at this role, it's like you have to like be able to build from 0 to 1, right? You have to be on the cutting edge of AI. You have to be good at you have to be good with people. You have to win trust, right, with these enterprise customers. You have to figure out the politics of their org and map it out and traverse it, right? So I think so I think you have to really we're looking for people who can span that full gamut of skills, and it's very hard to find. So if I'd love to talk to you if you guys think that you have that skill set. So.
Yeah, Howard's doing a good job pitching it, because I think it's true that I spent only one of my 5 years at Palantir doing forward deployed engineering, but it was like, honestly, I learned so much in that time, and it's just I draw on it again and again. Even just being like an early stage engineer at some startups later on, you have to be really scrappy and kind of like be super generalist in the way you solve problems, like curious about all types of things, and humble at times when it's like necessary. I think another thing I was just thinking about, I don't know if we touched on this, but rotating between forward deployed engineering and what you think of as like core product engineering is really important. Again, some scar tissue born of like if you try to grow those organizations separately, you end up wanting them to be more conjoined so that you can like more smoothly rotate. So like at Nominal, one of my happiest moments was like watching an early career engineer who'd been building a product fly to Europe and like try to use it on site and then come back and be like, oh my God, it sucks. And then was super motivated to fix a bunch of parts of it. And then kind of the other direction as well, like someone who's been doing a lot of forward deployed engineering, like them having a really, like they have conviction and passion about a certain thing that otherwise wouldn't be on the product roadmap. And they just eventually are like, I'm going to go build this myself. To that point, I think like at different times in the journey as a startup founder, you have to be careful about the role can evolve and your needs as a company can change. Ross Fubini, who's this like wonderful investor we work with, he talks about you go through these product expansion and contraction phases as a startup or as a company. And I think at different times in that expansion and contraction motion, you might want different things from a forward deployed engineering team. And, again, I think there's a humility in people who are willing to like roll with that change, and also you might actually like change your hiring profile at different times as a result.
Similar to what was just said, we like to hire former founders, people who, care about revenue. That's a big thing that, a lot of engineers don't. They just want to go and build something cool, and, that's actually really wonderful in many cases. But, caring about revenue goes a long way. Caring about the success of the business. I have a phrase that, like, the FDE team is the team that wants to say yes because they care about us winning that customer. A lot of engineers, they might not admit it, but they want to say no to what the customer is asking for. They want to continue building their thing, which is also admirable in its own way. And then so former founders, early engineers, people who can talk to the customer, also not true of all engineers. So there's an additional screen on the FDE interviews that we do where like, it's can you actually communicate? Not a hard requirement for regular engineering. You don't normally have to put them in front of customers, right? Anyway, and perhaps all of this is obvious, but the team that wants to say yes, I think, is pretty fun. We're very grateful when the customer appreciates. Yeah, they do get a little addicted, but they're generally very happy to have a real engineer they can talk to.
Colin, you mentioned you've gone from 2 people when you started to 90 plus just in a couple of years. So what about it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think like largely echoing what people have said before. Like I think it's like the relentless pursuit of value is like what makes good forward deployed engineer. And I think so much of the time people start to love the form of what they've created more than the function. And when it's like when you just look at the users use it and they don't use it, they're just like, oh, but like we built the thing. Like you gotta like the thing. When actually it's like the best forward deployed engineers are like, right, we'll just like tear it up and let's make something completely different. Like because that's what they need. And that is like probably the most key thing. Like because we have folks from like we've like a fairly diverse set of backgrounds. Like we got some BCG, McKinsey folks, we got a ton of Palantir folks, and a lot of ex-founders. But the common thing is that they're all just like super outcome focused, and like they really don't care what the answer is as long as they're using it, and that is kind of the proof. So that's probably the most important thing that I've seen.
Maybe with that, I want to open it up to the audience for some questions as well. Who has a question? Should we start over here?
Yeah,
you just stand up and say your name as well. So yeah.
Hey, I'm Varun. I'm a FDE right now, so this is very interesting to me. I think you guys spoke on like a really interesting tension that exists between kind of within FDE orgs, right? Which is, customers really get addicted to the FDE motion, but FDEs as an individual, right? You really want people who are high customer empathy, want to say yes, really want to own the customer outcome. I guess have you guys, built any tactics within your orgs to kind of counterbalance those tensions, right? So like organizationally making sure that like, you're able to pull back FDEs once the customers, maybe had their needs satisfied, in a way that your customer doesn't like fire you when you go from, 10 people in the org and scale it down because you feel their needs are met. But also obviously like building a culture of saying yes.
I can go really briefly on this. My answer is probably different from the others. As you can probably tell, we stretch our FDEs very thin at Ramp. So any given customer, they only ever had like a third of an FDE. And so if that goes to like a quarter or a sixth, they don't notice quite as much. We've never really had like 2 FDEs on a single customer. So that is admittedly a departure from the traditional model, but we find that creates the necessary incentives where the FDE is looking at all of their customers and trying hard to put their attention where it's needed, as opposed to like just, the customers are all asking for stuff, and the FDE has to look at that holistically and think to themselves what will actually move the business.
Anything anyone else would add?
Yeah, I mean, if the customer's going to fire you because you reduce the headcount, that means you haven't done the value engineering of like, are you delivering continuous value, right? Because if you are, then even if you take those people, like the people should not be the thing that's delivering that value. And I think, but also we're the same. We have many accounts per person, so they never got addicted. They never had the expectation that I guess there's like 5 people show up and they kind of what they're paying for is the man hours of these 5 people, right? Like I think part of the FDE's job is to communicate that that's not what they're buying, right? They're buying the outcome or the continuous value delivery. So.
One final point is I've seen companies that have FDs assigned to customers for 12, 24 months or even longer. And then I've seen others where it's like 6 weeks as a rule. So that can be one way to limit it.
Other questions? Maybe we do one more over there and then we can come back up here.
Hi, I'm Richa, like rich, money rich. Sorry, I have so much. I mean, rich, A at the end. I'm graduating from MIT very soon and joining as FDE. So I'm seeing a lot of roles out there which actually matches my interests and roles and everything, but FD is definitely unique, and that's why I'm here today. So when it comes to like solution engineering or solution architect, where in the pipeline they actually fit, and where do you see you come in or you make a distance? So like that's what I want to ask.
So I guess speaking to OpenAI, like there's kind of a delineation between those roles in OpenAI where like solution engineering is pre-sales for like the scale motion, so like the wider market. Solution architecture is the scale motion post-sales for like the wider market. FDE is actually like a different business unit that is like separate from those, and we only really work like 10 engagements at a time. So it's like it's sort of like almost a different motion where like we get qualified in very early if they think this is an FDE shaped problem, and then we run the full like pre and post sale from that point, because it's almost like we're like a cross-functional team that land and we're like, okay, is this something we want to do? Are there milestones? Do we think it's going to convert into a recurring revenue? We have sort of like a bunch of checks we do as to like whether this is something we want to do. And that means like, unfortunately, like though we do want to say yes to like every problem, we're very like excited by every problem. We have to say like no more times than we have to say yes, because there's a lot of people with interesting problems, but not every problem is going to like get to scale and to like ARR or like has a chance of doing that. So that's like sort of how we prioritize in OpenAI.
Cool. Can we maybe come back up here? I think we had another one right here.
Cool. Thank you so much. I'm Emmy. I'm also an FDE right now, and I'd love to compare notes on the team structure that exists within your companies on the FDE team. So at Palantir, for example, my understanding is there's Echo and Delta, and so I'm wondering, like, does that kind of resonate with how you structure your team at your respective companies? And if not, then what does that look like? Like, what is the delineation of responsibilities between the different individuals that consist of your FDE teams?
I'll jump in. So at Nominal, we call it mission ops, mission development, and then we have a growing sales team, so account executives. And mission ops at Nominal are people who are highly technical. They tend to be like former mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. Some of them designed engines before, but not necessarily like code native in the way they approach things. Increasingly, that's changing. Just like with AI, I think a lot of them are like, they can't help themselves. They're writing a lot of code. And the delineation of responsibilities kind of falls down to, if you really need to understand like what is the workflow of the mechanical engineer who's using Nominal, like it's really helpful if you have that background being part of that organization before, and that's why we have the mission ops role. That's kind of like the origins of the Echo role at Palantir, like very loosely speaking. Like they wouldn't always have the background, but they would maybe read a book about it. They were generally intelligent people who like maybe had consulting backgrounds and were used to kind of like going 0 to 1 in a new space. And then increasingly, like I think we're a growing company. Like Nominal's around 150 people and growing every day, and we're trying to like figure out really carefully like, well, what is the delineation between like an account executive who might be doing some of the rapport building, like understanding what is the path to increased value at this company like over the next 5 years, versus at Palantir, like that role didn't exist. So good questions to ask, and I would like just kind of a meta point to this in the previous question, but anyone who's doing forward deployed engineering or like considering a job in forward deployed engineering, because it's such a broad role, like ask a lot of questions like this of any company that you're considering working with.
I would say for us, it's like, I think we think of it as, so I was also at Palantir, and I was actually an Echo intern, and then I was a Delta, but I think for us, we actually see this, like, where AI has allowed us to unlock is sort of this radical ownership model that's now possible, where, the forward deployed engineer, like, if they have the skill set, right, should be able, it's like, it used to be that, hey, there was just too much work in a particular deployment for, you needed the deltas to code, right? And then you needed the echoes to go and sort of own the customer relationship and figure out new use cases and stuff. But if you can dramatically reduce the cost of the production of code, then perhaps you can have this radical ownership where one person can actually hold all of that context in their head, right? And that's beautiful because they also know, what's hard and what's easy, and they're not just a pure non-technical person making those value decisions, right? So I think so that's what we're trying to make happen, and we'll see if it's possible if we can find the people with the skill sets. So.
Yeah, and I guess like just the OpenAI model is like sort of like I guess maybe similar to the initial one where it was like we have this sort of Echo and Delta concept, but I think like I came from like classic consulting back in the days, and I like hated like the amount of roles that there were. Like there was like specific shapes of people, and then like all these different like it was like a total nightmare. So when we started the team, there was only FDEs, and there's some of the early FDEs are in the room, and like we realized very quickly that we like really needed the Echoes to like take up a lot of the work around the account, because these were big accounts. There's lots to do. So we then introduced that role, and then we've just started to add these like experts, industry experts, where like we're working in semiconductors and stuff. What we're finding is, like I was saying earlier, like we're now solving harder and harder problems. And what that means is, like in AI, it means that you have to be able to write like good tasks and evals for those things. And it means that like when we go up the stack in like chip design, we really need to know like how to design a chip. So we're now introducing within the vertical teams like chip verification engineers, or like people in life sciences who worked as scientists or whatever. So like there's a small number of them, but again, like what we're hoping is that they'll have an outsized impact in terms of like all the generalist FDEs will learn a ton from them and like still do their general FDE stuff.
Super interesting. Maybe you have time for one or two more. Why don't we take one?
Yeah, so you also had a version of that, like platform and product is very important, as well as the FD motion. You need to have a balance of both. I'm curious, like, how does like the priority and one influence the other? I mean, Ramp is a good example. It's very much platform product first, and FDEs like to help adopt it. But for like Nominal and Dataland, like, how much do you just try a bunch of FDE cases and that informs the product, versus you have like a very strong product platform vision, and then the FDE motion is more to like adopt that and like slightly shape it?
I think it goes back to my earlier answer about like expansion and contraction. So I think it is like actively changing right now. I think that we are finally at a scale where like Nominal can build more of a platform, and having like an FDE motion is like a real test of that, right? Like, are they finding it valuable? Are they building on top of it? Like in many ways, they will be the first users of something that you claim to be a platform. This is something that Palantir did a really good job of, but like the FDEs would build on top of the platform first, and then eventually it would graduate to be like the users, the customers would build on top of it directly. So I think if you're making a platform as a company, like it is all the more obvious maybe to grow an FDE team alongside it.
Calvin, I'm curious what that looks like for you all.
Yeah, it's pretty much exactly what you said. The platform comes first at Ramp. We know what it ought to do. It ought to like take a picture of your receipt and it gets processed properly. So we know exactly what we're trying to achieve on the customer side. So the FDEs are more figuring out how to achieve that in the particular cases with the particular constraints of these enterprise customers, as opposed to doing something radically new. Now, that being said, there is some like cyclical flow that goes on where sometimes a bunch of customers will have the same blocker towards implementation of Ramp. And then it's like, all right, that should really be in the platform. Like, we're tired of dealing with this. We're going to build it once and for all. And that's where an FDE does get to act like a core engineer. And similarly, if there's something on the roadmap that just needs to be pulled forward, we'll often just pull it forward and ship it ourselves in coordination with the core team there.
Awesome. I think we are out of time here, so why don't we move to wrap? But maybe just quickly before we do, you all are hiring. How can people get in touch?
Calvin@ramp.com. Easy to remember.
Jason@nominal.io.
Howard@dataland.io.
Colin.jarvis@openai.com.
All right, so there you have it. You can reach out if you're interested. But yeah, I want to say thank you all for joining. Thank you to our panelists for being here. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you all.